On November 23, 1889, at 2:30 in the afternoon, Eliza Bryant purchased a quarter-pound of arsenic from a chemist's shop on Queen Street, Manchester. By nightfall, her husband was dead in his bed. The coroner ordered an inquest. The police notebooks and assize records preserve the following account. The afternoon of November 23rd was cold and damp, a persistent Manchester drizzle turning the cobbles of Queen Street slick and dark. Eliza Bryant, aged 34, entered the premises of chemist William Hargreaves at 2:25, according to the clock above the door. She wore a brown serge dress, faded at the cuffs and hem, and a shawl of muted plaid wool. The shop smelled of camphor, vinegar, and the metallic tang of patent medicines lining the shelves. She requested a quarter-pound of white arsenic for the purpose of rat-killing, as required by the Arsenic Act of 1851. Hargreaves, a man of 50 with spectacles perched on his nose, recorded the sale in his poison register, her name, address on Back Turner Street, the amount, and the stated purpose. His script was a tight, hurried copperplate. She signed her mark, an X, beside the entry, her hand unsteady. He weighed the poison on brass scales, the fine white powder cascading into a blue paper packet, which he folded with precise tucks. She paid 4 pence from a small purse of worn leather. By 3 o'clock, she was back in the 2-room basement dwelling at number 12, Back Turner Street. Her husband, Thomas Bryant, a carder in a cotton mill, returned from his shift at 5:45, his clothes dusted with fine white fibres. The evening meal, a stew of potatoes and a scrap of mutton, was consumed by the light of a single paraffin lamp. At 7:30, Thomas complained of a burning sensation in his throat and stomach. By 8, he was vomiting into a bucket beside the hearth, his body convulsing with dry heaves when nothing remained. A neighbour, Mary Dobson, heard the retching through the thin wall and knocked at 9:15. She found Thomas on the floor, curled on his side, his face a mask of sweat. Eliza was wringing a cloth in a basin of water. Mary sent her own son running for the parish constable, whose beat included the courts off Turner Street. Constable John Ware arrived at 9:50. He observed the man's condition, the laboured breathing, the bluish tint to his lips. He dispatched a boy to fetch the police surgeon. Dr. Alistair Finch arrived at 10:40. By then, Thomas Bryant was unconscious. His pulse, recorded in the doctor's notebook, was rapid and thready. His skin was cold to the touch despite the fire. Dr. Finch administered mustard emetics and stimulants to no effect. At 11:27, Thomas Bryant ceased breathing. The doctor closed the man's eyes, noted the time, and informed Constable Ware a death certificate could not be issued. The room was sealed, the basin and bucket removed as possible evidence. The constable remained at the door until relieved at dawn. The drizzle had turned to a steady, soaking rain that pooled in the uneven flagstones of the court. The investigation began at first light on November 24th. Inspector Joseph Croft of the Manchester City Police attended the scene at 7 o'clock. The basement room measured 15 feet by 12, with a low, beamed ceiling that trapped the smells of damp wool, stale food, and the faint, acrid odour of vomit. A ledger from the Manchester and Salford Poor Law Union, later entered as evidence, showed the Bryant household had received outdoor relief twice in the preceding year, the last payment being 5 shillings in September. A rent book, discovered in a drawer, showed arrears of 6 weeks to the landlord, a Mr. Earnshaw. Of particular note was a life insurance policy with the Prudential Assurance Company, dated August 3rd, 1889, insuring the life of Thomas Bryant for the sum of £12. The premium of 1 penny per week had been paid punctually. Inspector Croft's men conducted a methodical search. In a tin box on the mantel, beneath a few hairpins and a broken thimble, they found the blue paper packet, its contents approximately half consumed. It was folded shut, the powder caked in the creases. Constable Ware was dispatched to Queen Street to secure the chemist's poison register. William Hargreaves produced the ledger, his finger tracing the entry from the previous afternoon. The signature, a wavering X, matched others Eliza had made on poor relief forms. The inspector ordered the removal of the body to the Manchester Royal Infirmary mortuary for post-mortem examination. The procedure was conducted at 2 that afternoon by Dr. Finch, observed by Inspector Croft. The room was tiled, cold, and smelled sharply of carbolic and decay. The stomach and its contents were removed, sealed in a clean glass jar provided by the infirmary, and labelled. The intestines and samples of liver and kidney were also secured. These were conveyed by police cab to the laboratory of Dr. Edward Thorpe, a public analyst for the county. Dr. Thorpe's notes described the reception of the specimens at 4:15. He conducted a Marsh Test, a meticulous process involving the generation of arsine gas and its deposition on a porcelain plate. The procedure took 3 hours. The laboratory smelled of zinc, sulfuric acid, and the distinct garlic-like odor of the gas. A silvery black metallic mirror formed on the plate. Thorpe measured its thickness with calibrated lenses. He compared it to standard samples. He recorded his findings in a formal certificate to the coroner. Arsenic, a fatal quantity. 72 grains recovered from the stomach contents alone. Inspector Croft returned to Back Turner Street at 7 that evening. Eliza Bryant was sitting by the cold hearth, still in the brown serge dress. The inspector informed her she was required to accompany him to the Town Hall Police Office for questioning. She did not speak. She gathered her shawl and followed him out into the damp night, the constable walking behind. At the office, in a room lit by a single gas jet, Croft took her statement. She spoke quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "He came home ill," she said. "The mill dust, it always upset his stomach." When shown the insurance policy, she stated, "It was his idea. For burial." When asked about the arsenic, she said, "For the rats. They were in the walls." The statement was written down, read back to her, and she made her mark. At 9 o'clock, Inspector Croft formally charged her with the willful murder of Thomas Bryant. She was taken to the city bridewell. Her personal effects, a purse, a handkerchief, a key, logged in the property register by the desk sergeant. The committal hearing took place on November 26th in the magistrate's court at the town hall. The room was crowded, the air thick with the smell of damp wool and tobacco. Eliza Bryant stood in the dock, a wooden enclosure raised 2 feet above the floor. She was represented by a solicitor, Mr. Arnold Shaw, appointed by the court. The presiding magistrate, Mr. Benjamin Forster, heard the evidence of Constable Ware, who described the scene of death. Dr. Finch summarized his post-mortem findings. Inspector Croft presented the poison register, the insurance policy, and the tin box containing the blue packet. William Hargreaves identified the defendant and confirmed the sale. Dr. Thorpe's certificate was read aloud by the clerk, its clinical language stark in the hushed room. "I found in the contents of the stomach and in the tissues of the liver arsenic in quantity more than sufficient to cause death." Mr. Shaw cross-examined Hargreaves briefly, establishing that many people purchased arsenic for vermin and that the signature was a common mark. He did not contest the scientific evidence. The magistrate found there was sufficient case to answer. Eliza Bryant was committed to take her trial at the next Manchester Assizes for the murder of Thomas Bryant. She was remanded to Strangeways Prison to await trial. The witnesses were bound over to appear at the Assizes. The Manchester Evening News reported the hearing the following day. A brief article on page 4 headlined, "Alleged Poisoning in Ancoats." Over the following weeks, the prosecution case was compiled by the Treasury Counsel, Mr. Lionel Carter. Witness statements were finalized, exhibits labeled and sealed. In the prison, Eliza Bryant was visited by Mr. Shaw on 2 occasions to discuss her defense. He would later note in his memorandum that she spoke little, mostly answering his questions with yes or no or a faint shake of her head. She asked once, "How long until the trial?" He told her the winter assizes would commence in January. Public interest remained muted, the case one of several that would appear on the crowded court calendar. The wheels of the assize machinery turned with bureaucratic inevitability. The indictment was drawn up by the Clerk of the Crown. The trial was listed for the second week of the new year. The courtroom fell silent for a moment after the magistrate announced the committal. The only sound the scratching of the journalist's pencils and the rustle of the clerk's papers as he prepared the commitment warrant. Strangeways Prison, Manchester, December 1889 to January 1890. Eliza Bryant was received into the female wing on the evening of November 26th. The cell to which she was assigned measured 7 feet by 10, with walls of cold, rough-hewn stone, painted a dull ochre, to a height of 8 feet. The ceiling was vaulted brick. A single window, barred and of frosted glass, was set high in the outer wall, offering no view but a grey diffusion of daylight. The furnishings consisted of an iron bedstead fastened to the wall, its mattress stuffed with coir, a single woolen blanket, a small wooden table, and a stool. An earthenware jug and basin sat on the table, a slop bucket in the corner. The air carried a permanent chill and the faint institutional smell of carbolic soap, boiled cabbage, and human confinement. The daily routine was immutable. At 6 in the morning, the bell rang. The cell door was unlocked by the wardress, and the slop bucket was emptied and rinsed at a communal sink in the corridor. At 6:30, breakfast was delivered, a pint of gruel and 6 ounces of bread. The bread was coarse, dark, and dense. Dinner came at noon, a pint of soup, usually potato or pea, and another 6 ounces of bread. Supper, at 5, was a repetition of breakfast. The food was passed through a hatch in the cell door. On Tuesdays and Fridays, a small portion of boiled meat was added to the dinner ration. The prison surgeon, Dr. Meredith, visited weekly. His log records examining Eliza Bryant on December 3rd, 10th, and 17th. He noted she was of slight build, subdued, and in adequate health. He asked if she had complaints. She said she was cold. An extra blanket was issued. The chaplain, Reverend Peters, visited every Wednesday afternoon. He would stand just inside the cell door, his prayer book in hand. He read from Scripture, usually the Psalms. He asked if she wished to pray with him. She would kneel by the bed, her head bowed, but rarely spoke. On one visit in mid-December, she asked a question, her voice so low he had to lean forward. "Will they let me see my children before?" The chaplain's visit log notes, he told her he would inquire, but that such permissions were rare for those under sentence of death. She had 2 children, a boy and a girl, aged 8 and 6, who had been taken in by the parish workhouse after her arrest. The sounds of the prison formed a constant background. The clang of iron doors, the jangle of keys, the tread of the wardress's boots on stone, the murmur of other prisoners in the exercise yard, the distant hum of the city beyond the walls. She spent hours sitting on the stool, her hands in her lap, often staring at the patch of light on the floor from the high window. The wardress's daily report notes that on several occasions she was observed giving her meat ration to a younger prisoner in the adjacent cell by passing it through the feeding hatch when the wardress's back was turned. Mr. Shaw, her solicitor, visited twice more before the trial. They discussed the evidence. He explained the prosecution would rely on the purchase, the motive of the insurance money, and the chemical analysis. She listened, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Frost gathered thick on the inside of the cell window, obscuring what little view there was. The days were marked only by the routine, the passage from bell to bell, from meagre meal to meagre meal, as the year turned. The Court of Assize, Manchester, convened on January 13th, 1890. The courtroom was a high-ceilinged, wood-panelled chamber, smelling of beeswax, old books, and the damp wool of the spectators crammed into the public gallery. Mr. Justice Horace Wills presided, his scarlet robes vivid against the dark wood of the bench. The jury of 12 men, shopkeepers, clerks, a farmer, was sworn in at 10 o'clock. Eliza Bryant stood in the dock, dressed in the same brown serge, now cleaned and mended. She looked smaller, her face pale against the dark wood. Mr. Lionel Carter opened for the Crown. He outlined the case, the purchase, the death, the insurance, the scientific proof of poisoning. The first witness was Constable Ware, who described his arrival and the subsequent investigation. William Hargreaves testified next, identifying the defendant and the poison register. He was shown the blue packet, now sealed in a glass exhibit jar. "That is the packet I sold," he stated. The crucial scientific evidence came from Dr. Edward Thorpe. He described the Marsh Test in detail, his voice calm and precise. The metallic deposit indicated arsenic. I quantified it. The amount recovered from the stomach was 72 grains. A quarter of a grain is a medicinal dose. 2 grains can be fatal. This was a massive quantity. Mr. Carter asked, "Could such an amount be administered accidentally?" Dr. Thorpe replied, "It is inconceivable." The insurance clerk testified to the policy and the regular payments. Mary Dobson, the neighbor, took the stand. She described hearing the illness and seeing Thomas Bryant on the floor. Mr. Carter asked if she had seen rats in the building. "No, sir," she said, "not in my rooms." The prosecution closed its case at 2:15. Mr. Shaw rose for the defense. He called no witnesses. Instead, he cross-examined Hargreaves. "Is it not common for householders, especially in poorer districts, to purchase arsenic for rats?" "It is." "And you required a signature, as the law demands?" "I did." "And for those who cannot write, a mark is sufficient?" "It is." He then turned to the insurance clerk. "Is it not prudent for a laboring man to insure his life for burial expenses to avoid a pauper's grave?" "It is common, yes." He addressed the jury in a short closing statement. He argued there was no direct evidence of administration. The arsenic was in the house for a lawful purpose. Her husband, distressed and in pain, might have taken it himself. The burden of proof, he reminded them, lay entirely with the Crown. Justice Wills summed up the case at 3:40. His voice was dry, methodical. He instructed the jury on the law of murder, on circumstantial evidence, on the need for certainty. He reviewed the evidence, the purchase so near the death, the motive of £12, the scientific proof of poison in the body. He noted the defense's suggestion of accident or suicide. "You must decide," he said, "whether the facts, taken together, lead you to the inescapable conclusion that the prisoner administered the poison with intent to kill." The jury retired at 4:10. The courtroom emptied to a murmur. Eliza Bryant was taken to a holding cell below. The jury returned at 5:25. Their faces were solemn. The courtroom reassembled, the air tense and still. The clerk asked the foreman, a grocer named Higgins, for the verdict. "Guilty," he said, the word sharp in the quiet room. Mr. Justice Wills donned the black cap, a square of silk. He addressed the prisoner. "Eliza Bryant, you have been convicted of the willful murder of your husband. The sentence of this court is that you be taken from hence to the place from whence you came, and from there to a place of execution, and that you be hanged by the neck until you are dead, and that your body be buried within the precincts of the prison. And may the Lord have mercy on your soul." The chaplain murmured, "Amen." Death. The final days were spent in the condemned cell at Strangeways, a slightly larger room adjacent to the execution shed. A wardress was with her at all times. Reverend Peters visited daily. She asked again about her children. A request was forwarded to the prison governor. It was denied. On the morning of January 29th, she was woken at 7. A weak winter sun was attempting to break through the Manchester fog, casting a pale, diffuse light through the cell's barred window. She was dressed in a plain, coarse calico gown provided by the prison. Her own clothes had been bundled for disposal. She ate a little bread, drank a cup of tea. At 7:45, the governor, the chaplain, the chief wardress, and the executioner, James Billington, entered the cell. Billington, a short, stout man in a dark suit, proceeded to pinion her arms behind her back with a leather strap. Her hands were small, the wrists thin. The procession left the cell at 7:52. The walk to the execution shed was 30 yards along a covered stone passageway. Their footsteps echoed. The shed was a brick structure within the prison walls containing the gallows platform. Present were the governor, the surgeon, Dr. Meredith, the under-sheriff of the county, Reverend Peters, 2 wardresses named Anne Griggs and Martha Poole, and 4 newspaper reporters approved by the Home Office. The room was cold, the air still. The gallows beam, of thick oak, was fixed 8 feet above the trapdoor. A new hemp rope soaked in resin to stiffen it hung from a hook. Billington positioned her on the chalk-marked center of the trapdoor. He placed the white hood over her head, then adjusted the noose around her neck, the knot positioned carefully below her left ear. The chaplain recited from the order for the burial of the dead, his voice trembling slightly. "Man that is born of a woman hath but a short time to live." Eliza Bryant stood perfectly still. Billington stepped back and reached for the lever. The under-sheriff nodded. At 8 o'clock precisely, Billington pulled the lever. The trap-doors fell open with a loud, sudden crash. The rope snapped taut. The body dropped 4 feet and jerked, then swung in a diminishing arc. Dr. Meredith stepped forward, his watch in hand. He monitored the pulse at the neck. He listened for a heartbeat with his ear to her chest. At 8:03, he straightened and addressed the governor. "I pronounce this woman dead." The body was left suspended for a full hour as required by law. The prison bell tolled a single heavy stroke that echoed over the fog-shrouded exercise yard. At 9, the body was lowered and placed in a plain wooden coffin that had been standing by the wall. It was carried to the prison mortuary. Dr. Meredith completed the death certificate. Cause of death, judicial hanging. Time, 8 o'clock. The body was buried that afternoon in the unconsecrated ground within the prison walls, in a grave dug by 2 trusty prisoners. No marker was placed. The grave was number 22 for that year. The governor's journal notes the execution was carried out in an orderly manner. The trial transcript, witness statements, and exhibits were bound and sent to the Central Criminal Court archives. The conviction rested on 3 documents: the chemist's poison register, the analyst's certificate, and the insurance policy. The widow's mark in the ledger was the only proof she had purchased the arsenic. No one had witnessed her hand the poison to her husband. The apothecary's assistant later testified in an unrelated case that Hargreaves often filled the register hours after a sale, from memory, when the shop was quiet.